Sarah Martinez had always been different from other girls in her small Texas town. While her classmates played with dolls, she was in the backyard practicing knife throws at wooden targets her father had set up. Her Mexican-American heritage gave her olive skin that tanned easily under the desert sun, but it was her piercing green eyes that made people remember her. Those eyes seemed to see everything, missing nothing. Her father, Miguel Martinez, was a former Army Ranger who had served 3 tours in Afghanistan. When he returned home, he brought with him both visible and invisible scars. The visible ones were easy to see: the limp from shrapnel in his left leg, the burn marks on his forearms from an IED explosion. The invisible ones were harder to spot, but just as real. Miguel found peace only when he was teaching his daughter the skills that had kept him alive in combat. Sarah's mother, Elena, worked double shifts at the local hospital as a nurse. She worried about her husband's obsession with training their daughter in what she called war games, but she also understood that this was Miguel's way of healing, and Sarah seemed to thrive under his instruction. The girl was a natural athlete with reflexes that amazed even her father. By age 12, Sarah could hit a target at 50 yards with a throwing knife. She could climb a 30-foot rope in under 20 seconds. Her father taught her to move through the desert without making a sound, to read tracks in the sand and to find water where others saw only barren land. He showed her how to survive on insects and desert plants when necessary, skills he had learned from indigenous trackers during his military service. The nickname Falcon came from her 8th grade biology teacher, Mrs. Thompson. During a field trip to study desert wildlife, Sarah spotted a peregrine falcon's nest high in a cliff face that even the park ranger had missed. Her eyesight was remarkable, but it was more than that. She seemed to have an instinct for predicting where animals would be, how they would move, what they would do next. "That girl has the eyes of a falcon," Mrs. Thompson told the other teachers. "She sees everything." The nickname stuck, though Sarah never knew its origin. Her classmates started calling her Falcon, and even her parents began using the name. It fit her perfectly. Sarah excelled in school despite spending most afternoons and weekends training with her father. She maintained a 4.0 GPA while also becoming the star of the school's track team. Her specialty was the steeplechase, a grueling race that combined distance running with obstacle navigation. She had never lost a race, not once in 4 years of competition. College recruiters from across the country sent letters offering full scholarships. Sarah could have chosen any university in America, but she had different plans. On her 18th birthday, she walked into the military recruitment office in downtown San Antonio and told the startled recruiter that she wanted to join the Navy. "Most people your age want to join the Army or Marines," the recruiter said, looking at her test scores and physical fitness records. "Why the Navy?" "Because I want to be where the action is," Sarah replied. "And I've heard the Navy has the best special operations units." The recruiter, a veteran himself, recognized something in those green eyes. This wasn't a young person looking for college money or career training. This was someone who had been preparing for war her entire life, someone who had found her calling. Sarah's parents were proud, but terrified. Elena cried for 3 days after Sarah left for boot camp. Miguel was quieter, but Sarah caught him cleaning his old service rifle the night before her departure, something he only did when he was deeply emotional. Boot camp in Great Lakes. Illinois was supposed to break down recruits and rebuild them as sailors. For Sarah, it felt like a vacation. The physical training was easier than what her father had put her through. The mental challenges were manageable for someone who had maintained perfect grades while training like a professional athlete. Her drill instructors noticed her immediately. "Martinez," Chief Petty Officer Williams called out during the 3rd week. "Front and center." Sarah jogged to the front of the formation, her boots hitting the ground in perfect rhythm. She stood at attention, eyes forward, waiting for whatever challenge was coming next. "I've been doing this job for 15 years, Chief Williams said, walking around Sarah like a predator circling prey. "I've seen tough recruits, smart recruits, and dedicated recruits, but I've never seen someone who combines all 3 like you do. Tell me, Martinez, what's your goal in the Navy?" "To serve my country to the best of my ability, Chief," Sarah replied in the standard response. "That's what they all say," Williams said. "But what do you really want?" Sarah hesitated for just a moment. Her fellow recruits were listening, and she knew that standing out too much could make her a target. But something in the chief's tone told her that an honest answer was what he was looking for. I want to be the best warrior the Navy has ever produced. Chief, she said quietly. Chief Williams smiled for the first time since Sarah had met him. I thought so. Report to my office after evening chow. We need to talk about your future. That conversation changed everything. Chief Williams had served with Naval Special Warfare units before becoming a drill instructor. He recognized potential when he saw it, and Sarah Martinez had more potential than anyone he had ever encountered.
He began making phone calls, sending emails,
and pulling strings that most recruits never knew existed. Sarah graduated boot camp first in her class, but instead of reporting to her originally assigned ship, she received new orders. She was being sent to Coronado, California, for specialized training. The orders were vague, mentioning only advanced seamanship and tactical instruction. Her parents came to graduation, and Miguel immediately understood what was happening when he saw the new orders. His daughter was being fast-tracked for something special, something dangerous, something that would put all his training to the test. Are you ready for this, mija? He asked her during their brief time together after the ceremony. Sarah looked at her father with those Falcon eyes, and he saw something there that made him both proud and afraid. His little girl was gone, replaced by a warrior who was just beginning to understand her own capabilities. I've been ready my whole life, Papa, she said. Everything you taught me, everything we practiced, it was all preparing me for what comes next. As Sarah boarded the plane to California, she had no idea that she was about to enter a world where only the strongest survived, where her nickname would take on a meaning beyond anything her biology teacher could have imagined, and where she would face challenges that would test every skill her father had taught her, and many she had yet to learn. The bus ride from San Diego Airport to Naval Amphibious Base Coronado felt like a journey to another world. Sarah pressed her face against the window, watching the Pacific Ocean stretch endlessly toward the horizon. The base sat on a narrow strip of land between the ocean and San Diego Bay, and she could feel the salt air even through the sealed windows of the military transport. When the bus stopped at the main gate, Sarah noticed something different about this place. The security was tighter than anything she had seen at Great Lakes. Multiple checkpoints, armed guards who looked like they could bench press a small car, and an atmosphere of barely contained intensity that made her skin tingle with anticipation. Her orders directed her to Building 164, a nondescript concrete structure that looked like every other military building she had ever seen. But the men coming and going from this building were different. They moved with a fluid confidence that reminded her of her father when he was in full combat mode. Their eyes constantly scanned their surroundings, and even in casual conversation, they maintained an alertness that spoke of constant readiness for action. Inside Building 164, Sarah found herself in a waiting room with 12 other sailors. All were men, all looked to be in exceptional physical condition, and all studied her with curiosity and skepticism when she walked in. She was the only woman in the room and the youngest person by at least 3 years. You sure you're in the right place, sweetheart? Asked a muscular sailor with a thick Boston accent. The regular Navy offices are in the other building. Sarah looked at him with those green eyes that had earned her the nickname Falcon. She didn't speak, didn't react to his condescending tone. She simply stared at him until he looked away, uncomfortable under her gaze. The other men in the room noticed the exchange, and the atmosphere shifted slightly. This wasn't just some lost recruit who had wandered into the wrong building. A Navy SEAL instructor entered the room, and the casual conversation stopped immediately. Master Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez was a legend in the special operations community. He had served in every major conflict of the past 2 decades, had more confirmed kills than most snipers, and had been awarded every medal for valor that the Navy could give. He was also known for washing out more potential SEALs than any other instructor in the program's history. Ladies and gentlemen, Rodriguez said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had faced death and won. Welcome to the most difficult training program in the United States military. Over the next 6 months, we will push you beyond every limit you thought you had. Most of you will quit. Some of you will be injured. A few of you might not survive. He paused, letting his words sink in. Sarah felt her heart rate increase, but not from fear. This was what she had been preparing for her entire life. This is BUDS, Rodriguez continued. Basic Underwater Demolition SEAL Training. If you complete this program, you will join the most elite fighting force in the world. If you quit, you'll spend the rest of your military career knowing that you weren't good enough when it mattered most. The training began immediately. No gradual introduction, no period of adjustment. Rodriguez led the 13 candidates outside to a beach where the Pacific Ocean crashed against the shore with relentless power. The water was cold, even by California standards, and Sarah could see hypothermia in the near future of anyone who spent significant time in those waves. "Your first exercise is simple," Rodriguez announced. "You will link arms and walk into the ocean until the water is chest deep. You will remain there for 1 hour. If anyone lets go of the chain, everyone starts over. If anyone quits, everyone runs 5 miles in the sand." The 13 candidates looked at each other, then at the churning water. The sailor from Boston who had questioned Sarah's presence earlier muttered something under his breath about impossible standards. Sarah stepped forward and extended her arms to the men on either side of her. "Let's do this," she said simply. The water was shockingly cold, even worse than Sarah had anticipated. Within minutes, she felt the familiar sensation of her body trying to conserve heat by restricting blood flow to her extremities. Her fingers began to go numb, but she held tight to the arms of the men beside her. The waves crashed over their heads repeatedly, filling their mouths with salt water and making breathing a conscious effort. After 20 minutes, the first man quit. He simply let go and stumbled toward shore, unable to take any more. Rodriguez made the remaining 12 candidates start over. After another 15 minutes, 2 more men gave up. Start over again. By the end of the hour, only 7 candidates remained in the water, including Sarah. She was shivering uncontrollably, her lips were blue, and she couldn't feel her feet. But she was still standing, still holding on, still ready for whatever came next. "Interesting," Rodriguez said as the survivors stumbled out of the water. "Martinez, you're smaller than everyone else. You've been in the military for exactly 3 months and you have no combat experience. How are you still here when men with years of training have already quit?" Sarah's teeth were chattering so hard she could barely speak, but her voice was steady when she answered. "Because quitting isn't an option, Master Chief. My father taught me that the only way to fail is to stop trying." Rodriguez nodded approvingly. He had been watching Sarah throughout the exercise, noting how she encouraged the men around her, how she adjusted her position to help shorter candidates keep their heads above water during the larger waves, and how she never once looked toward shore with longing. This young woman had something special. The physical training that followed over the next several weeks was brutal beyond anything Sarah had imagined. 4-mile runs in soft sand while carrying telephone poles, obstacle courses that had to be completed in impossible time limits, swimming exercises in the open ocean while wearing full gear, hours of calisthenics that left even the strongest men shaking with exhaustion. But the physical challenges were only part of the program. Rodriguez and his team of instructors were experts at finding psychological weak points and exploiting them ruthlessly. They screamed at candidates until some broke down crying. They assigned impossible tasks with contradictory instructions. They woke everyone up at random hours for surprise inspections and emergency drills. Sarah watched as more candidates quit every week. The Boston sailor lasted 3 weeks before walking up to Rodriguez during a particularly brutal beach workout and saying, "I can't do this anymore." He wasn't the only one. By the end of the first month, only 4 of the original 13 remained. The instructors paid special attention to Sarah, seemingly determined to find her breaking point. They made her carry heavier loads than the men. They criticized her technique more harshly. They assigned her extra duties that kept her awake when others were sleeping. But every challenge they threw at her, she met with the same quiet determination that had carried her through that first hour in the freezing ocean. "Why don't you quit, Martinez?" Rodriguez asked her one evening after a particularly difficult day. "You've proven you're tough. You don't have anything left to prove to anyone." Sarah was sitting on her bunk cleaning her rifle for the 3rd time that day. Her hands were steady despite the exhaustion that she felt in every muscle of her body. "Because this is what I'm meant to do, Master Chief," she said without looking up from her weapon. "My whole life has been preparing me for this moment. I'm not going to walk away now." Rodriguez studied her for a long moment. In 30 years of military service, he had seen countless young warriors who thought they were destined for greatness. Most of them learned humility the hard way. But Sarah Martinez was different. She had the skills, the determination, and most importantly, the kind of inner strength that couldn't be taught. As the 2nd month of training began, Sarah and the 3 remaining male candidates faced their next major challenge, Hell Week. 7 days of continuous training with no more than 4 hours of sleep total. Physical exhaustion combined with mental stress designed to break even the strongest spirits. Sarah looked at the obstacle course they would be running repeatedly for the next week, then at her fellow candidates. She could see doubt in their eyes, fear about whether they could survive what was coming, but she felt something different. For the first time since arriving at Coronado, she felt like she was exactly where she belonged. Hell Week began at midnight on a Sunday, with the sound of gunfire and explosions that shattered the peaceful California night. Sarah jerked awake in her bunk as instructors stormed through the barracks, screaming orders and firing blank ammunition. Smoke grenades filled the sleeping quarters with thick, choking fog that made breathing difficult and visibility nearly impossible. "Get up. Get up. We're under attack," Rodriguez shouted over the chaos.
Full gear outside in 2 minutes or you're all dead.
Sarah rolled out of her bunk and began the practiced routine of putting on her equipment in complete darkness. Boots, tactical vest, helmet, weapon. Everything had to be perfect even when she couldn't see her own hands. Around her, she could hear the other 3 candidates struggling with their gear, cursing as they tried to find equipment in the confusion. The next 7 days would blur together into a nightmare of constant motion, physical exhaustion and mental challenges designed to break the strongest minds. Sarah and her fellow candidates would run hundreds of miles, carry telephone poles and heavy rubber boats across beaches and through surf, complete obstacle courses while under simulated enemy fire, and endure hours of interrogation designed to test their ability to protect classified information. The first 24 hours were the worst. No sleep, constant physical activity, and instructors who seemed determined to find reasons to make everything harder. Sarah's team had to carry a 200-pound rubber boat on their heads for miles through soft sand while instructors fired weapons around them and set off explosions designed to simulate combat conditions. Martinez, Master Chief Rodriguez, appeared beside her as she struggled under the weight of the boat. "You're the weak link in this team. Your teammates are suffering because you can't carry your share." Sarah knew this was psychological warfare, an attempt to make her doubt herself or become angry. She had watched other candidates lose their composure when instructors targeted them personally. But her father had prepared her for this kind of mental attack during their training sessions in the Texas desert. "Master Chief, I respectfully disagree," she replied through gritted teeth, never breaking stride. "I'm carrying exactly my portion of this boat, and my team knows they can count on me." One of her teammates, a massive sailor named Johnson from Alabama, spoke up without being asked. "She's right, Master Chief. Martinez has been solid since day one. We've got this." Rodriguez smiled slightly and moved on to harass someone else. This was exactly what he wanted to see. Candidates supporting each other under pressure, refusing to let the instructors divide them against each other. By the second day, hallucinations began. Sleep deprivation combined with constant physical stress created a dangerous mental state where reality became flexible. Sarah watched one candidate have a complete conversation with a palm tree, apparently convinced it was his girlfriend from back home. Another candidate tried to eat a handful of sand, believing it was a sandwich. Sarah fought against the hallucinations by focusing on specific details around her. She counted her steps, memorized the serial numbers on her equipment, and recited childhood memories in perfect detail. Her father had taught her these techniques during their desert survival training, explaining that the mind needed anchors to reality when the body was pushed beyond its normal limits. The third day brought underwater training that nearly killed 2 candidates. They had to swim long distances while carrying heavy equipment, navigate underwater obstacle courses while holding their breath for dangerous periods, and complete combat scenarios in the surf while waves crashed over their heads. Sarah discovered that her small size was actually an advantage in the water. She needed less oxygen than her larger teammates, could slip through underwater obstacles more easily, and had the endurance to keep swimming when others were exhausted. During one exercise, she actually had to help Johnson complete an underwater course when he began to panic in the confined space. "I can't do this," Johnson whispered to her during a brief rest period. "I keep thinking I'm going to drown down there." Sarah looked at him with those green eyes that had earned her the nickname Falcon. Johnson was twice her size and had been in the Navy for 4 years, but she could see real fear there. "Listen to me," she said quietly. "When we go down, follow my movements exactly. Don't think about the water or the obstacles. Just focus on staying behind me. I'll get us both through." The next underwater course, Johnson stayed right behind Sarah as she navigated the maze of pipes and barriers. Her movements were fluid and confident, and somehow her calm presence allowed him to control his panic. They completed the course together, and Johnson looked at her afterward with something approaching awe. "How did you do that?" he asked. "You made it look easy." "My father used to make me hold my breath underwater in stock tanks back home," Sarah explained. "He said that if I could stay calm underwater, I could stay calm anywhere." The fourth and fifth days brought weapons training under extreme fatigue. Candidates had to maintain their marksmanship skills while exhausted, dehydrated, and operating on less than 1 hour of sleep per day. Sarah's shooting scores actually improved during this period, something that amazed even the instructors. "Most people can't hit the broadside of a barn when they're this tired," Rodriguez observed as he watched Sarah put 5 rounds through the same hole at 200 yards. "How are you shooting better now than you were on day 1? "Fatigue eliminates unnecessary movement," Sarah replied, cycling the bolt on her rifle and preparing for the next series of targets. "When I'm too tired to overthink the shot, my body just does what it's been trained to do." Rodriguez made a note in his evaluation folder. This young woman was displaying skills and mental toughness that he rarely saw in candidates with years of experience. She was becoming someone he wanted on his team when the real missions began. The 6th day brought the final major challenge, a night mission that required the team to infiltrate a mock enemy compound, gather intelligence, and escape without being detected. This exercise combined every skill they had learned during training: stealth movement, marksmanship, underwater operations, and teamwork under pressure. Sarah's team approached the target compound through the surf, swimming underwater for the final 200 yards to avoid detection by enemy sentries. Sarah led the way, her natural navigation skills guiding them through the darkness to the exact landing point they needed. Once on shore, they moved through the compound like ghosts. Sarah's ability to read terrain and predict enemy movements proved invaluable as she guided her team around patrol routes and security cameras. When one sentry nearly spotted Johnson, Sarah created a distraction that drew the guard's attention away while her teammate slipped past undetected. The intelligence gathering phase required Sarah to climb a 40-foot tower to access a communications station while her teammates provided security. She scaled the structure in complete darkness, using only her sense of touch to find handholds and avoid making noise that would alert the enemy. At the top, she had to photograph specific documents and download files from a computer system, all while listening to her teammates' radio reports about increasing enemy activity below. Her hands were steady as she completed the mission requirements, even when explosions began. Going off around the compound as instructors tried to create additional pressure. The escape required the team to fight their way through simulated enemy forces to reach an extraction point on the beach. Sarah's marksmanship skills proved decisive as she provided covering fire that allowed her teammates to advance. When Johnson was wounded by a blank round during the firefight, Sarah helped carry him the final 300 yards to the extraction point while continuing to engage enemy targets. As the 7th day dawned, the 4 remaining candidates found themselves back on the beach where Hell Week had begun. They were exhausted, dehydrated, and pushed beyond every limit they thought they had. But they were still standing, still functional, still ready for whatever challenge came next. Rodriguez stood before them as the sun rose over the Pacific Ocean, casting long shadows across the sand where they had suffered for 7 days and nights. "Congratulations," he said simply. "You have completed Hell Week. You have proven that you have the physical and mental toughness required to be Navy SEALs. But understand this, Hell Week is just the beginning. The real training starts now." Sarah looked around at her 3 teammates, men who had become brothers through shared suffering and mutual dependence. She felt a sense of accomplishment unlike anything she had ever experienced, but also a recognition that Rodriguez was right. This was just the beginning of a journey that would test every skill her father had taught her, and many more she had yet to learn. As they walked off the beach toward their next phase of training, Sarah couldn't help but think about her father's words from years earlier. The only way to fail is to stop trying. She hadn't stopped trying, and she never would. 6 months after Hell Week, Sarah Martinez stood in formation with 17 other Navy SEAL candidates on the graduation platform at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado. Of the original 13 who had started the program with her, only she remained. Johnson had made it through Hell Week but was medically discharged after a training accident during advanced weapons instruction. The other two had quit during the psychological evaluation phase, unable to handle the mental stress of constant assessment. The new graduates represented the survivors from multiple training classes that had been combined due to high attrition rates. Sarah was not only the sole female graduate but also the youngest, and had achieved the highest scores in every phase of training. Her instructors had stopped being surprised by her performance and had begun using her as an example for other candidates. Admiral Thompson, the commanding officer of Naval Special Warfare Command, approached the microphone to address the graduates. Behind him, the blue Pacific Ocean stretched toward the horizon, and the American flag snapped sharply in the California breeze. "Ladies and gentlemen," Admiral Thompson began, "you are now Navy SEALs. You have earned the right to wear the trident, the symbol of the most elite fighting force in the world. But remember this, the trident is not a destination, it is a beginning. Your real service to your country starts today." When Admiral Thompson called Sarah's name to receive her trident pin, something unusual happened. The other graduates, hardened warriors who had endured months of brutal training together, began to applaud. This was not part of the ceremony protocol, but even the instructors joined in. Sarah Martinez had earned something, beyond respect. She had earned the brotherhood that came with proving herself under fire. Master. Chief Rodriguez was the one who pinned the golden trident to Sarah's dress uniform. As he did so, he leaned close enough that only she could hear his words. "I've been doing this for 20 years, he whispered. "I've trained some of the best warriors this country has ever produced. But I've never seen anyone with your combination of skills and determination. The teams need people like you." Sarah felt the weight of the trident against her chest, but more than that, she felt the weight of responsibility. She thought about her father, who was somewhere in the audience fighting back tears of pride. She thought about all the training sessions in the Texas desert, all the lessons about never giving up, all the preparation that had led to this moment. 3 weeks later, Sarah received her first assignment. She was being posted to SEAL Team 6, officially known as Naval Special Warfare Development Group, based in Dam Neck, Virginia. This was the most elite unit within an already elite organization, the team responsible for the most sensitive and dangerous missions in the world. When Sarah arrived at Dam Neck, she quickly discovered that being accepted into the broader SEAL community was very different from being accepted by Team 6. These operators had years of combat experience, multiple deployments to war zones, and a level of expertise that made her feel like a beginner again. They were polite but distant, waiting to see if this young woman could perform under real combat conditions. Her first team leader was Lieutenant Commander Marcus Webb, a veteran of 7 deployments who had participated in some of the most classified operations of the past decade. Webb was known for his tactical brilliance and his ability to bring his people home alive from impossible situations. He was also known for his skepticism about new team members until they proved themselves in actual combat. "Martinez," Webb said during her first briefing, "I don't care what your training scores were or what the instructors at Coronado said about you. This team operates in places where mistakes get people killed. Until you've been tested under real fire, you're an unknown quantity." Sarah understood his position completely. These men had earned their reputations through actions in combat zones around the world. She was still unproven, regardless of her training accomplishments. Her opportunity to prove herself came sooner than expected. 3 months after joining Team 6, Sarah was selected for a mission that would take her to the mountains of Afghanistan. Intelligence sources had located a high-value target in a compound near the Pakistani border, and Sarah's team was tasked with a capture operation that required precision, stealth, and the ability to operate in extreme terrain. The target was Ahmad Hassan, a bomb maker responsible for IEDs that had killed dozens of American soldiers. He was hiding in a fortified compound built into a mountainside, accessible only through treacherous terrain that vehicles couldn't navigate. The mission would require a team to climb to an altitude of 12,000 feet, approach the compound undetected, capture Hassan alive, and extract with their prisoner before enemy reinforcements could arrive. Webb studied satellite images of the target area with his team gathered around a planning table in their secure briefing room. The compound was built like a fortress, with stone walls, multiple defensive positions, and escape routes that led deeper into the mountains. "This is going to be a difficult approach," Webb explained, pointing to the aerial photographs. The only way to reach the compound without being detected is to climb this cliff face here. It's nearly vertical, about 400 feet of exposed rock. Any team member who can't make that climb will compromise the entire mission. Webb looked directly at Sarah as he said this. She was the smallest member of the team and had never been tested in high-altitude mountaineering under combat conditions. If she couldn't handle the physical demands of the approach, the mission would have to be scrubbed or redesigned. "I can make the climb," Sarah said simply. "Mountain climbing was part of my training with my father. I've done harder routes in worse conditions." Webb nodded but remained skeptical. Training with her father in Texas was very different from climbing a cliff face in Afghanistan while carrying 60 pounds of combat equipment. 2 weeks later, Sarah found herself on a military transport plane flying toward Bagram Air Base in Afghanistan. This would be her first deployment to a combat zone, her first real test as a Navy SEAL operator. She checked and rechecked her equipment during the long flight, running through mental rehearsals of the mission plan. Her teammates were professionals who had done this type of operation dozens of times, but Sarah could feel their tension. No matter how much training and preparation went into a mission like this, actual combat always contained elements of unpredictability that could turn a routine operation into a nightmare. The plane landed at Bagram just before dawn, and Sarah got her first look at Afghanistan through the small window of the transport. The landscape was harsh and unforgiving, brown mountains stretching toward the horizon under a pale sky. This was a place where warriors had been fighting and dying for thousands of years, where the terrain itself was as dangerous as any human enemy. At the base, Sarah met with intelligence officers who provided final updates on the target. Hassan was confirmed to still be in the compound, but satellite imagery showed increased activity in the area that suggested he might be planning to move soon. The window for the operation was closing rapidly. "We go tonight," Webb announced after reviewing the latest intelligence. "Insertion by helicopter at 2100 hours, approach on foot to the target compound, execute the capture operation, and extract before dawn. Weather conditions are marginal but acceptable." Sarah spent the day making final preparations. She studied the route photographs until she could navigate the approach with her eyes closed. She zeroed her weapons and checked her climbing gear multiple times. Most importantly, she mentally prepared herself for the reality that tonight she might have to take a human life for the first time. As evening approached, Sarah painted her face with camouflage makeup and put on the night vision goggles that would be essential for the mountain approach. Around her, the other team members went through their own pre-mission rituals with the calm professionalism of veterans who had done this many times before. Webb gathered the team for a final briefing as they prepared to board the helicopter that would take them to the insertion point. "Remember," he said, "our job is to capture Hassan alive if possible. But if he resists or if the situation becomes compromised, we adapt. Everyone comes home. That's the priority." He looked at each team member, making eye contact to ensure they understood their responsibilities. When his gaze reached Sarah, she saw something there that hadn't been present during training. This wasn't the team leader testing a new recruit anymore. This was a combat veteran trusting her with the lives of his men. "Martinez," he said, "you'll be leading the climb to the compound. Your route, your pace, your decisions. Can you handle that responsibility?" Sarah felt the weight of what he was asking. If she made a mistake during the approach, if she chose the wrong route or moved too slowly, the entire mission could fail. Worse, her teammates could be killed. "I can handle it," she replied, and meant every word. As the helicopter lifted off into the Afghan night, Sarah looked down at the mountainous terrain that would soon test every skill her father had taught her, and every lesson she had learned during SEAL training. Tonight, she would discover if she truly deserved the nickname Falcon and the trident she wore on her uniform. The helicopter dropped Sarah's team onto a rocky ledge 8 miles from the target compound at exactly 2100 hours. The night was clear and cold, with a 3/4 moon providing enough ambient light for their night vision equipment to function effectively. Sarah felt the familiar weight of her combat gear as she adjusted her pack and checked her weapons one final time. Lieutenant Commander Webb gathered the team in a circle for final communications check. Each operator tested their radio equipment and confirmed their assigned frequencies. In the mountains of Afghanistan, reliable communication could mean the difference between mission success and disaster. "Martinez takes point," Webb announced quietly. "She'll set the pace and choose the route to the compound. Everyone else maintains visual contact and follows her lead. Radio silence unless we have contact with the enemy. Sarah nodded and moved to the front of the formation. Using her night vision goggles, she studied the terrain ahead. The satellite photos had shown the general route, but the reality of the mountainous landscape was far more complex than any photograph could capture. Loose rock, hidden crevices, and unexpected cliff faces would make the approach challenging even for experienced mountain climbers. The first 2 miles of the approach were relatively easy, following a narrow valley that provided concealment from observation posts around the target compound. Sarah moved with the fluid confidence that her father had taught her during their training sessions in the Texas desert. Every step was calculated, every movement designed to minimize noise and avoid loose rocks that could give away their position. Behind her, 5 Navy SEALs followed in single file. These were among the most experienced special operations warriors in the world, but they deferred to Sarah's expertise in mountain navigation. She had proven during training that she could read terrain like others read books, finding paths where none seemed to exist. The 3rd mile brought the first serious obstacle. The valley ended at the base of a sheer rock wall that rose nearly 400 feet toward the compound above. This was the climb that Webb had been concerned about, the approach that would test every member of the team's physical capabilities and Sarah's leadership under pressure. Sarah studied the rock face through her night vision equipment, looking for the safest route upward. The stone was weathered limestone with enough handholds and ledges to make the climb possible, but it would require technical climbing skills and absolute precision. A single mistake at this altitude could mean a fatal fall. "Rope up," Sarah whispered into her radio, using the minimum communication necessary to coordinate the climb. The team attached themselves to climbing ropes in pairs, with Sarah leading the first rope and Webb following 30 feet behind. The other 4 SEALs would follow on 2 additional ropes, maintaining enough separation to prevent a single rockfall from taking out multiple climbers. Sarah began the ascent, her movements smooth and deliberate despite the 60 pounds of combat equipment strapped to her body. Her father had taught her to climb using her legs rather than her arms, conserving upper body strength for when it would be needed most. She found handholds that were invisible to less experienced climbers, choosing a route that would be manageable for her heavier teammates. Halfway up the cliff face, disaster nearly struck. A section of loose rock gave way under the weight of Peterson, one of the team's demolitions experts. The sound of falling stones echoed through the valley below, as Peterson swung sideways on his climbing rope, struggling to find new handholds before his weight pulled the entire team off the cliff. Sarah was 30 feet above Peterson when she heard the rock fall. Without hesitation, she quickly anchored herself to the cliff face and activated her radio. "Peterson's in trouble," she whispered. "I'm coming down to assist." "Negative," Webb's voice came back immediately. "Continue the climb. We'll handle Peterson." But Sarah could see something that Webb couldn't from his position below. Peterson's climbing rope had been damaged by the falling rocks and was beginning to fray under his weight. If it failed completely, Peterson would fall to his death and likely pull Webb down with him. Sarah made a decision that went against direct orders, but followed the deeper principle that no SEAL gets left behind. She rappelled down to Peterson's position, moving with the speed and precision of someone who had been climbing since childhood. "Your rope's damaged," she whispered as she reached Peterson. "Transfer your weight to my line." Peterson was a veteran operator with years of experience, but mountain climbing had never been his specialty. Sarah could see the strain in his face as he struggled to maintain his grip on the rock wall. "I've got you," Sarah said quietly, positioning herself so that Peterson could clip into her climbing system. "Trust me and follow my movements exactly." With Peterson secured to her rope, Sarah began climbing again, choosing a route that accommodated his less advanced climbing skills. She moved slowly and deliberately, ensuring that every handhold was solid before committing their combined weight to it. The rest of the team watched from below as Sarah essentially carried Peterson up the final 200 feet of cliff face. Her strength and endurance were remarkable, but more impressive was her ability to remain calm under pressure and find solutions to problems that could have ended the mission. When they finally reached the top of the cliff, Peterson grabbed Sarah's arm as they caught their breath. "You saved my life," he whispered. "That rope would have failed in another minute." Sarah simply nodded and began preparing for the final approach to the compound. She had done what any team member would do for another, But Peterson understood that her quick thinking and climbing skills had prevented a catastrophe that could have killed multiple operators. Webb reached the top of the cliff and immediately moved to Sarah's position. She expected to be reprimanded for disobeying his order to continue climbing, but instead he looked at her with something approaching amazement. "How did you know the rope was damaged?" he asked quietly. "I could see the individual strands separating where the rock had cut into it," Sarah replied. "In another few minutes it would have failed completely." Webb made a mental note to include this incident in his after-action report. Sarah Martinez had just demonstrated the kind of tactical judgment and technical skill that took most operators years to develop. The final approach to the compound required the team to move across open ground. Under the observation of enemy sentries, Sarah studied the layout through her scope, identifying patrol patterns and blind spots in the defensive positions. 2 guards on the main wall, she whispered into her radio. Rotating patrol every 12 minutes. Window of opportunity when they cross paths on the far side. The team waited in position for the guards to complete their patrol cycle, then moved across the open ground like shadows. Sarah's ability to predict the timing of the patrol allowed them to reach the compound wall without being detected. Now came the most dangerous part of the mission. They had to breach the compound, locate Ahmad Hassan and capture him alive while neutralizing any resistance from his bodyguards. Intelligence suggested there were at least 6 armed men inside the compound, all willing to fight to the death to protect their leader. Sarah positioned herself at the main entrance while her teammates moved to cover the exits. Her job was to be the first person through the door, to eliminate any immediate threats and create space for the rest of the team to enter safely. Webb gave the signal, and Sarah breached the door with explosive charges that her teammates had placed. She was through the opening before the smoke cleared, her weapon ready and her senses heightened to superhuman levels. Inside the compound, she found herself face to face with 2 armed guards who were reaching for their weapons. Time seemed to slow as her training took over. Her rifle came up smoothly, and she placed 2 precise shots that neutralized both threats before they could return fire. 2 down, moving to the next room, she reported into her radio as she advanced deeper into the compound. The next room contained Ahmad Hassan himself, along with 3 more bodyguards. Hassan was reaching for a suicide vest when Sarah burst through the doorway, her weapon trained on his center mass. "Don't move," she shouted in Arabic, one of the languages she had studied during her specialized training. "Put your hands where I can see them." Hassan hesitated for a moment, his hand inches from the trigger device that would detonate explosives strapped to his chest. Sarah could see the calculation in his eyes as he weighed his options. If he triggered the vest, he would kill himself along with several American operators, achieving a kind of martyrdom that his cause would celebrate. "You have children," Sarah said in Arabic, remembering intelligence about Hassan's family. "They need their father to live. Put down the trigger and no one else has to die tonight." It was a psychological gambit that required Sarah to read Hassan's personality in seconds and appeal to whatever humanity remained in him. For a moment that seemed to last forever, the bomb maker stared at this young American woman who spoke his language and seemed to understand his motivations. Finally, Hassan raised his hands and stepped away from the suicide vest. Sarah moved quickly to secure him, while her teammates eliminated the remaining bodyguards who had tried to resist. The capture phase of the mission was complete, but the most dangerous part was yet to come. They had to extract from the compound and reach their pickup point before enemy reinforcements arrived. Intelligence suggested that Hassan's organization had fighters positioned throughout the mountains who would respond rapidly to any attack on their leader. As the team prepared to leave the compound with their prisoner, Sarah heard the sound that every special operations warrior dreads, the distant rumble of vehicles approaching at high speed. Hassan's reinforcements were coming, and the Americans were about to find themselves outnumbered and surrounded in hostile territory. Webb looked at Sarah as they prepared to move out. "Can you get us out of here the same way we came in?" Sarah studied the terrain and calculated their options. The cliff face they had climbed to reach the compound would be impossible to descend quickly while carrying a prisoner. But she remembered seeing an alternative route during their approach, a narrow valley that led toward their extraction point, but would require precise navigation in darkness. "I know another way," she said. "It's longer but safer. Follow me." As enemy vehicles surrounded the compound and automatic weapons fire began to echo through the mountains, Sarah led her team into the Afghan night, carrying the most wanted bomb maker in the region, and trusting in skills that her father had taught her in the Texas desert years earlier. The real test of her abilities was just beginning. Sarah led her team through the narrow mountain valley with Ahmad Hassan bound and carried between two operators. Behind them, the sound of pursuit grew closer as enemy fighters spread out through the mountains, determined to rescue their captured leader or kill the Americans who had taken him. The extraction point was still 4 miles away across treacherous terrain that would challenge even experienced mountain fighters. Sarah knew that their only advantage was her ability to navigate through landscape that their pursuers knew far better than any American ever could. "They're gaining on us," Peterson whispered into his radio as he monitored the enemy communications on their frequency scanner. "At least 30 fighters, maybe more. They've got vehicles on the roads and foot patrols moving through the valleys." Sarah studied the terrain ahead through her night vision equipment. The valley they were following would eventually lead to their extraction point, but it also created a natural choke point where enemy forces could easily surround them. She needed to find an alternative route that would keep them ahead of the pursuit while still allowing them to reach the pickup zone. "There," she said quietly, pointing to what looked like a sheer rock wall on the left side of the valley. "We go up and over that ridge. It will add distance but keep us out of their search pattern." Webb looked at the route Sarah was suggesting and felt his heart sink. What she was pointing to wasn't just difficult terrain. It was nearly impossible landscape that would challenge professional mountain climbers even in daylight with proper equipment. Attempting it at night while carrying a prisoner and being pursued by enemy forces bordered on suicide. "Martinez, that's not a route," Webb said. "That's a cliff face. We can't carry Hassan up there and we don't have time for a technical climb." Sarah was already studying the rock wall more carefully, looking for features that weren't visible from their current position. Her father had taught her to see possibilities where others saw only obstacles, to find paths that existed only for those who knew how to look for them. "There's a fault line running diagonally up the face," she said, pointing to shadows that were invisible to the others. "It creates a natural staircase if you know where to look. I can get us up there." The sound of vehicles grew louder as their pursuers closed the distance. Webb realized they were running out of options. The valley route would lead them directly into enemy hands, and attempting to fight their way through 30 or more fighters while protecting a prisoner was not a viable option. "Lead the way," Webb decided. "But if this doesn't work, we're all dead." Sarah began the ascent, moving with confidence despite the apparent impossibility of the route. What had looked like a sheer cliff face from below revealed itself to be a series of natural ledges and handholds that she followed like steps on a staircase. Her teammates watched in amazement as she found footholds and grips that seemed to appear wherever she needed them. "How does she do that?" muttered Rodriguez, the team's communications specialist, as he followed Sarah up the rock face. "It's like she can see handholds that don't exist." The climb was exhausting, especially while carrying Hassan, who had begun to resist once he realized they were taking him away from any possibility of rescue. Sarah had to stop periodically to help her teammates navigate particularly difficult sections, always finding ways to make the impossible seem manageable. Halfway up the cliff face, disaster struck again. Hassan, in a desperate attempt to escape, broke free from his restraints and tried to throw himself off the ledge rather than be captured. Peterson grabbed him just as he began to fall, but the sudden weight pulled both men toward the edge of the narrow ledge where they were resting. Sarah reacted instantly, dropping her weapon and diving toward Peterson and Hassan as they teetered on the brink of a 200-foot fall. She managed to grab Peterson's equipment harness with one hand while securing herself to the rock face with the other, stopping their fall with strength that amazed her teammates. "I've got you," she said calmly as Peterson struggled to regain his footing while maintaining his grip on the struggling prisoner. "Easy movements. Let me pull you back up." Using techniques her father had taught her during their cliff climbing sessions in Texas, Sarah maneuvered both men back to safety on the ledge. Hassan, apparently shocked by how close he had come to death, stopped struggling and allowed himself to be resecured for the remainder of the climb. "That's twice you've saved my life tonight," Peterson said quietly as they caught their breath. Sarah didn't respond, already focused on the final section of the climb. They were close to the top of the ridge, but this last section would be the most difficult. The rock was loose and weathered, requiring perfect balance and precise movements to avoid sending rocks cascading down on the climbers below. As they reached the top of the ridge, Sarah heard something that made her blood run cold. Helicopter engines, approaching fast from the direction of the compound. Either American reinforcements were coming to help with the extraction, or enemy forces had acquired aircraft and were about to turn the pursuit into an aerial manhunt. Sarah activated her radio and contacted their extraction coordinator. "Control, this is Falcon. We have the package and are moving to the pickup zone. What's the status on those helicopters?" "Falcon, those are not friendly aircraft," came the immediate response. "Enemy forces have acquired 2 helicopters and are conducting search patterns throughout your area. You need to reach the extraction point immediately." Sarah looked at the terrain between their current position and the pickup zone. 2 miles of open ground that would leave them completely exposed to aerial observation. If enemy helicopters spotted them crossing that terrain, the mission would end in a firefight that they couldn't win. "We need concealment," Sarah told Webb as she studied the landscape. "Those helicopters will spot us the moment we leave this ridge." Webb was thinking the same thing. They were trapped between pursuing ground forces and aerial surveillance, carrying a high-value prisoner who would be worth any sacrifice to recover or kill. The situation was rapidly becoming impossible. Sarah noticed something that the others had missed. A thick fog bank was rolling in from the west, driven by mountain winds that were common in this region during early morning hours. If they could time their movement correctly, the fog would provide the concealment they needed to reach the extraction point without being detected. "Fog's coming in," she pointed out to Webb. 15 minutes and we'll have perfect concealment all the way to the pickup zone." Webb checked his watch and calculated the timing. The helicopters would be overhead in less than 10 minutes, but the fog wouldn't provide adequate cover for another 15. They needed to find a way to hide for at least 5 minutes while remaining close enough to the extraction point to reach it quickly once the fog arrived. Sarah was already moving toward a solution. She led the team to a cluster of large boulders that had fallen from the cliff face centuries earlier, creating a natural hiding place that would be invisible from above. The space was cramped and uncomfortable, but it would keep them hidden from aerial observation. "Everyone stays absolutely still," Sarah whispered, as they squeezed into the hiding place with Hassan. "No movement, no radio transmissions, no sound of any kind." The helicopters passed overhead 3 times during the next 10 minutes, their searchlights sweeping the terrain in methodical patterns. Sarah could hear the radio chatter from the pilots as they coordinated their search, but her team remained invisible in their rocky shelter. When the fog finally began to roll across the landscape, Sarah led her team out of hiding and toward the extraction point. The thick mist provided perfect concealment but also made navigation extremely difficult. Sarah relied on her compass and pace counting to maintain their direction, while the fog reduced visibility to less than 10 feet. "Stay close," she whispered as they moved through the fog. "Single file, maintain contact with the person in front of you." The fog was so thick that each team member had to keep one hand on the equipment of the person ahead to avoid becoming separated. Sarah led them through the mist with the confidence of someone who could navigate by instinct alone, never hesitating about direction or pace. As they approached the extraction point, Sarah heard the sound she had been hoping for. American helicopter engines with a distinctive rotor signature that she recognized from her training. Their ride home was arriving on schedule despite the dangerous conditions. The fog began to thin as they reached the pickup zone, revealing a landscape that looked like something from another world. Mountain peaks emerging from clouds, valleys filled with mist, and in the distance the lights of the helicopter that would carry them to safety. Sarah's team reached the landing zone just as the helicopter touched down. They loaded Hassan aboard and secured him for transport, while the aircraft's crew prepared for immediate departure. Enemy forces were still searching for them throughout the mountains, and staying in one place too long would invite attack. As the helicopter lifted off into the Afghan morning, Sarah looked back at the mountainous terrain where she had just proven herself under the most demanding conditions possible. She had led her team through impossible terrain, completed a successful capture operation, and brought everyone home alive, despite overwhelming enemy pursuit. Webb removed his helmet and looked at Sarah with unconcealed admiration. "I've been doing this for 15 years, he said over the noise of the helicopter engines. "I've worked with some of the best operators in the world, but I've never seen anyone combine tactical skills with natural leadership ability the way you just did." Sarah felt the weight of the trident on her uniform, but now it felt different than it had during graduation. She had earned it through training and determination, But tonight she had proven it through actions under fire. She was no longer a promising candidate or an unknown quantity. She was a Navy SEAL who had demonstrated her worth to the most elite warriors in the world. The helicopter carrying Sarah's team and their prisoner flew toward the rising sun, leaving behind the mountains of Afghanistan where legends were made and heroes were tested. Sarah Martinez, the girl they called Falcon, had proven that her nickname was more than just a label. It was a perfect description of a warrior who could see opportunities where others saw only obstacles, who could lead where others could only follow, and who could soar above challenges that would defeat anyone with less determination. As the helicopter disappeared into the morning sky, the mountains below seemed to whisper a promise that this would not be Sarah's last mission, nor her greatest challenge. The war was far from over, and the world would have many more opportunities to test the young woman who had learned to hunt like a falcon and fight like a warrior.